And also the recording, you can.
We are live.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your support. Uh, Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to the Geopolitics and Strategies Coach Brazer on World in Transition. What are the major drivers of geopolitics in 2024? I'm Nikita Vats, a doctoral research fellow at the Jindal School of International Affairs, and it is my honor to moderate this event today. Before we proceed, I would like to extend our deepest apologies for a last-minute change in the moderation of today's panel. Due to a family emergency, Dr. Godbole, who was originally scheduled to moderate, is unable to join us. I have stepped in to fill this role, and I'm honored to be part of this important discussion. We appreciate your understanding and flexibility during this time. I would like to introduce briefly ideas in the constellation. So first, I'll start with the ideas. It is a newly established Office of Interdisciplinary Studies at OP Jindal Global University. It serves as a university-wide incubator for interdisciplinary research, providing a dynamic space for cross-disciplinary learning and exploration. Our mission is to facilitate collaborations across JGU and with external stakeholders, including practitioners, policymakers, think tanks, and civil society. Through this collaborative approach, we aim to create a novel research ecosystem that fosters innovative thinking and a multidisciplinary outlook. Uh, Ideas, through its geopolitics and strategies constellation, has aimed to find practical perspectives to solve the problems in international relations by utilizing economics, geography, history, technology, and other disciplines. It aims to foster the scope of practical discussions among various groups and experts. Within ideas, the geopolitics and strategies constellation stands as a hub for interdisciplinary research, focusing on the multifaceted aspects of global politics. Our constellation is dedicated to investigating various dimensions of geopolitics, including the conflict studies, migration and mobility, international relations, security studies, and trade and foreign policy. By exploring these areas, we aim to unravel the complexities of contemporary geopolitical dynamics and their implications for both regional and international affairs. Through rigorous research and collaborative efforts, we strive to provide actionable insights and strategies that address the pressing challenges in global politics, fostering a deeper understanding and more effective policy making in the international arena. Today's event, it marks the commencement of a series of initiatives aimed at fostering nuanced insights into global politics. We are thrilled to have a distinguished panel of experts who will share their perspectives on the major drivers of geopolitics in 2024. Allow me to introduce our esteemed panelists. I'll start with Professor Madhu Bhalla. Professor Bhalla has an extensive background in Chinese studies, having served as a professor at the Department of East Asian Studies at Delhi University. She holds an MA and PhD from Queen's University, Canada, and has held various academic and advisory roles at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and Queen's University, Canada. Uh, she has held a visiting fellowship at Fudan University, Shanghai, and has been a visiting scholar at the University of Sichuan at Chengdu. She has served on the Executive Council of the Institute of for Defense Studies and Analysis, IDSA as we commonly call it, New Delhi, and is currently on the advisory councils of the China centers at Madras University, at IIT Madras, MG University Kottayam, and Jamia Millia Islamia New Delhi. Currently, she is the editor of the India Quarterly published by the ICWA, Indian Council of World Affairs. Our next panelist, Ambassador Nalin Suri. Ambassador Suri has had a long and illustrious career in the Indian Foreign Service from 1973 to 2011. He has held several strategic, policy, and advisory roles, including as the High Commissioner to the United Kingdom and ambassador to China and Poland. He has also led the Indian Council of World Affairs as the Director General from 2015 to 2018, bringing together his extensive experience in economic, geopolitical, and defense and security issues with a research-led focus. Trained as an economist, he completed his master's from the Delhi School of Economics in 1972. Nalin Suri joined the Indian Foreign Service in July 1973. He has served in Indian missions in Hong Kong, Brussels, Dar es Salaam, Thimphu, and New York as Deputy Permanent Representative to the UN, as ambassador in both Warsaw and Beijing, and as High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. At headquarters, he has served both in the Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, and the Ministry of External Affairs. In the latter, his assignments included on separate occasions head of the East Europe and East Asian divisions as Secretary West. He has extensive cross-sectoral experience on issues ranging across the substance of India's foreign and security policies. During his career, he also focused on India's external economic relations and the international economy. Lastly, we have Ambassador Ashok K. Kantha, a career diplomat. Ambassador Kantha was the ambassador of India to China until January 2016. Before this, he was Secretary East at the Ministry of External Affairs in New Delhi, with responsibility for about 65 countries in India's extended neighborhood. His previous assignments include uh, the High Commissioner of India to Sri Lanka and Malaysia, the Consul General in Hong Kong, and the Deputy Chief of Mission in Kathmandu, Nepal. Earlier, Kantha served in different capacities at Indian missions in Singapore, China, and the USA, and at headquarters in New Delhi. He is an honorary fellow and former director of the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi, a distinguished fellow at Vivekananda International Foundation, New Delhi, and chair of the core group on China of the Confederation of Indian Industry. In his diplomatic career spanning over 38 years, Ambassador Kantha specialized in India's neighborhood and Asian affairs, with a particular focus on China. Apart from 3 assignments in China, he served as Joint Secretary East Asia and Director China at the Ministry of External Affairs for a period of 4 years each. I'm also honored to serve as your moderator for today's discussion. I'm a doctoral candidate at Jindal School of International Affairs, and my research focuses on geopolitics of energy transition from an Indian perspective. I'm involved with various research centers at OP Jindal Global University, including serving as the Junior Research Fellow at the Geopolitics and Strategies Constellation at the IDEA's office, and as Center Coordinator at the Center for Intelligence Research and Analysis, CIRA. Before this, I worked as a research associate at the National Maritime Foundation, New Delhi, a think tank which is supported by the Indian Navy. I hold a bachelor's in chemistry from the University of Delhi, and earned my master's degree in chemistry from Punjab University, India. In addition to my scientific background, I possess a master's degree in political science and international relations. Before jumping into the to the panelist, I would just give a brief about why we selected why we are having this particular conversation today, and why is it so relevant. So, as we look ahead to 2024, there are several major drivers that will shape the geopolitical landscape. The ongoing Russia-Ukraine war continues to redefine regional and global alliances, while the Israel-Palestine conflict remains a central issue with wide-ranging implications. The China-Taiwan issue is another critical area of concern with significant impacts on regional security and global economic stability. Additionally, technological advancements, economic shifts, and the global energy transition are reshaping international relations in profound ways. The rapid pace of innovation in artificial intelligence and cybersecurity is not only transforming industries, but also altering the strategic capabilities of the nations. AI-driven technologies are revolutionizing everything from defense systems to economic forecasting, while cybersecurity has become a critical component of national security, which becomes so therefore it is a necessity to forge new strategies and international cooperation to combat cyber threats. Economic shifts are also playing a crucial role. Emerging markets are gaining prominence on the global stage, while traditional economic powers face new challenges. Trade policies, economic sanctions, and the rise of digital currencies are redefining economic relationships and creating new alliances. The ongoing trade tensions between major economies, such as the United States and China, are reshaping global supply chains and influencing economic policies worldwide. The global push for sustainable development and the energy transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources are further influencing geopolitics. Nations are investing in green technologies and renewable energy infrastructure, leading to shifts in energy dependencies and economic strategies. This transition is creating new opportunities for cooperation and competition as countries strive to become leaders in clean energy sector. The implications of this shift are vast, affecting everything from international trade to environmental policies, and are central to discussions on global governance and economic resilience. In this dynamic and evolving landscape, Ideas, through its geopolitics and strategies constellation, is committed to exploring these complex issues by fostering practical discussions among experts and conducting interdisciplinary research. We aim to provide actionable insights and strategies. Our goal today is to address the pressing challenges in global politics and contribute to a more stable and prosperous international community. I would now like to invite Professor Madhu Bhalla and to share her insights on the same. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you, Nikita. I'm going to try and keep this as short as possible so we can actually have a discussion about this later on, right? So the world's in transition, and what are the major drivers of geopolitics in this year, in 2024, right? So from my perspective, much of what drives transition in 2024 depends on structural problems that we have witnessed over the last decade, while some of it is an outcome of the fallout of more recent events. So it's really is a question of the way in which both global economies, global security structures, and regimes, as well as political structures, have been restructuring themselves, deglobalizing, de-risking, decoupling, and becoming much more nation-oriented or nationalist-oriented in the definition of their own interests. These events, the more recent events like Israel's war on Palestine, are evidence of conflicts which have been ignored and exacerbated for very long by both global institutions and policies of major powers. And the challenge of the world order has come to a head in 2024. While we saw this happening in 2023 and post-COVID, but really this year it has actually come to a head with many middle powers now staking a claim in shaping global policies and values at variance with a Western rules-based order, which they see as neither rules-based nor an order. Many of the global drivers of geopolitics have been disruptive and will continue to be so in 2024. So we are not looking at a world in peace or moving towards peace imminently. First of all, war and conflict will continue to dominate global concerns. And I think we have seen that since last year, since the beginning of the Ukraine war, but particularly with the Hamas-Israel conflict that is devastating all of Palestine. The Ukraine-Russian war has settled into a long-drawn military adventure, and the influx of US and EU money will ensure that while Zelensky may not win the war, war itself will be sustained by periodical infusions of military hardware and Western technology. For example, the US aid to Ukraine in total now stands at 175.5 billion. EU's aid to Ukraine stands at 47 billion USD. By way of comparison, and this gives you a sense of how much they are putting into the war, by way of comparison, both gave the following for the climate fund. The EU gave 11.9 euros in private finance, billion euros in private finance, and 28.5 through public sources. The US gave 16.8 billion over 3 years from 2021 to 2023. So the priorities of the West lie distinctly elsewhere. Their interests are defined in terms of containing Russia, continuing the Ukraine war, using Zelensky as a surrogate for their interests in Europe. Israel's attack on Palestine has become the latest humanitarian disaster and threatens, among other things, A, to spread the conflict to the larger Middle East region, connect the dots, and second, connect the dots between and energize different radical elements, leading to many smaller conflicts in the region. And third, split Europe on recognition for Palestine. Norway, Ireland, Spain have already agreed to recognize Palestine. Many other countries across the world are doing the same. So around the Palestinian war, the war on Palestine, the world is consolidating against what has been a very structured and long-term policy by major powers in the West. The tragedy of the two wars in Europe, of course, is that major conflicts which threaten larger numbers of people in Africa are being completely ignored, despite the very clear evidence of impending disaster. For example, in Sudan, where warring parties increasingly have a free hand in eliminating opposing forces. The implications of an inflamed Africa are vast in terms of both humanitarian disasters and setting Africa back in development for many decades. Middle powers are hence questioning the priorities of the West, both in saving human lives and their own interests. Secondly, what we are seeing is a much more fractured world. To use a popular phrase from Amitav Acharya, a multiverse world. 2024, more than any other year, promises a multiverse world where power is clearly distributed among major powers, middle powers, and multilateral institutions. Events have conspired to consolidate the global South and with consequences for global leadership. And I think this is very significant for India as well. We saw this with India's position in the G20 last year, and the very clear indication that India would be very much part of the global South and look at interests from within the global South. While the major powers, the US, China, Russia, and the EU, are still at play, so are the increasing group of middle powers, which are turning away from decisions taken in Washington and Brussels. Many years ago, when the US was in Iraq, one of the experiences of the US in Iraq, as detailed by some of the leading State Department advisors to both Bush and then Obama, were that America's experience from Iraq is that it is neither all-powerful nor powerless, right? And this is particularly America's predicament today. And this is a predicament I think that the whole world is looking at and therefore taking their own decisions in relation to that. Thus, middle powers now have the ability increasingly to shape the narrative on global politics. South Africa's decision to take Israel to the CGI, for example, the Court of Justice, for example, is significant in terms of how this works with middle powers and with the global South. And essentially, the middle powers are now also focusing on the moral obligations and the moral obligations of institutions and the major powers and the moral outcomes of the war, even forcing utilitarian, pragmatists, and realists to condemn the war, like John Mearsheimer, Stephen Walt, etc., in the United States. And secondly, they are also placing greater pressure on global institutions to deliver on the promises of conventions on war crimes, ICJ, and the Charter of the United Nations, even as global distrust in these institutions erodes. So we are looking at a very complex situation where middle powers are looking to global institutions, and yet they don't trust global institutions to take the kind of decisions that need to be taken, especially in relation to the Security Council, for example, right? Thirdly, what we are also looking at is a global election super cycle. 40 states around the world are going to the polls this year, beginning from January, including India. We're in the middle of the poll season, right? And this would be okay because I mean, these are domestic issues, but this has implications for uncertainties in policy, foreign policies, economic policies, and regulatory uncertainties. These affect global markets. And we have to remember that of these 40 countries, they constitute 54% of the global population and 60% of the global GDP, which depends on the populations in these countries. Many nationalist governments in power shift to national industrial policies, and they will shift to they've already been shifting to national industrial policy, and they will increasingly shift to national industrial policies. They will create self-dependent, try to create self-dependent economies, de-risk from the global economy and supply chains, and decouple from supply chains. The effort will be there, whether this is completely successful or not is another matter. The effect of both COVID-19 as well as the risks confronted by the Ukraine war will mean that energy will be, I mean, these are the effects of both COVID-19 and the effects of the Ukraine war. And predominantly in this, the energy sector will be especially impacted. The Middle East situation will further impact the energy sector, the oil and gas pricing and supplies, exacerbating the race for alternative energy policies and investments. So deglobalization is a very real option for many states. The connection between economic policies and foreign and security policies will be an ongoing aspect of political changes in 2024. Whereas we had tended to actually separate economic policies from foreign and security policies, we are no longer going to be able to do that because our definitions of security, national security now are linked directly to energy security and economic dependencies or interdependencies, right? Fourthly, the oceans will gain geostrategic prominence. And this is something I think we have been looking at since 2023, when the first attacks by the Houthi rebels on commercial shipping happened after the Israel-Hamas war. Increasingly, this is going to happen, but more than that, I think what we're looking at with China as well and other countries as well is that the oceans are becoming important for economic and security reasons, and therefore are at risk of global disruption, geopolitical disruption. In the international, the international seas are also increasingly important for deep sea mining. And the implications of this, of course, are that about 1/3 of the supply of critical materials for alternative energy and the energy transition come from deep sea mining. So the race for energy security, the race for alternative energies also means that the oceans are going to remain at the center of geopolitical change and geostrategic promise, right? Fifthly, what we're looking at is China's economic decline. Much of this is structural, and it has to do with, of course, a decline in population. It has to do with the nature of the economy. It has to do also with the global economy and the impact of trade wars on China. What we're looking at really is that China is going to be growing 4.4, has grown in the decade of the 2020s at 4.4%. It will decline in 2030 to 3%, and it will decline in 2040 to 2%. Public finance will still stay high at the end of this period, whereas private finance still remains a very, very small portion of the Chinese economy, which really means that the state will still have till 2040 complete control over the economy. Productivity will be high, as will the investment in education, but there will be a minus growth in population, which means that the ability of the Chinese state to distribute the burdens of the economy will be that much narrower. The result, of course, is that because of the slowdown of the economy, the Chinese government will not be able to change to a circular economy, but will have to depend on an export economy, export-led growth. Now, this has implications given the implicit conflict with major powers like the US and the EU, and the fact that as the world moves towards much more national industrial policies, decoupling, de-risking will become a major part of the global economy. So China, therefore, will face the complications that this creates for its economy. What does that mean for the rest of the world? What that means that the rest of the world's global economy will also slow down because China is a large contributor to the global GDP. This has other implications for the undermining of growth or the vulnerabilities in national economic growth. And that is something that countries will have to factor into their economic policies. And finally, I think what we are facing in 2024 is the significance of digital security. This tops the concerns of most countries. As we go into this global, election super cycle, we are also seeing how digital security and AI, for example, affect the way in which public opinion is formed, public opinion is disseminated, and information is used or misused. So the ability to shape opinions, spread disaffection, control politics from abroad, makes this a pivotal year, 2024 pivotal year for digital security and for AI regulations. What countries are demanding and what populations are also demanding, and this is from Malaysia to the US to the EU and elsewhere, is transparency and accountability from IT firms. For example, especially in AI, when AI was first introduced in 2023, by January, there were 100 million users of ChatGPT. By August of the same year, that figure increased to 180 million, right? This has implications for the way in which economies are structured and the way in which employment is structured in the workplace. For example, low and medium skilled workers, especially women, will actually be affected most by the use of AI resources. While they won't lose their jobs, their wages will be lower. One of the consequences of this has been, of course, that the West and the EU has moved very swiftly to put in place at least debates and some principles on regulation. For example, the Santa Clara Principles of 2018, 2019, 2020, 21, which asked AI companies and ICT companies to communicate understandable rules, transparency on content and actions, have actually been implemented. EU is at the forefront of regulations, the GDPR, for example, Artificial Intelligence Act of 2024, which has just been passed in March. These are all efforts to regulate artificial intelligence, categorize the risk of artificial intelligence, and make a fundamental rights impact assessment. These are very important issues in the regulations. The Bletchley Declaration in London, for example, of last year was another significant move. G7 has also moved, but we do not see the G20, for example, or the BRICS, for example, as multilateral institutions moving in these areas. What we have from the global south is national policies that demand regulation, that are looking at regulation, that try to, synthesize their policies with what is being passed in the EU, etc., as we have done in India, and that is likely not going to work. We need a much more lively debate and a much more intense investment in our positions on digital security. So digital security, and because the US and China are racing towards creating the regulatory models, we will also find that the world will be separated into two blocks on this one. Do we go with China? Do we go with the US and with the EU? That is a problem that the world will increasingly confront. So we are looking at a multiverse world, but we're also looking at the world being, restructured into blocks around specific issues. And that is very likely to happen in 2024. The United Nations is going to have a summit of the, what's it called? The Summit of the Future in September 2024, in which many of these issues will be discussed. So the Global South had better be ready to make some contributions to that summit and bring their concerns to center stage. The McKinsey report, the recent McKinsey report, tells us how pervasive AI has become already. 1/3 of businesses use AI. 40% of tech companies, 38% of financial companies, 36% of companies that deal with the legal profession, right? So we are looking at the reality of AI permeating our lives, but we are not actually dealing with the ways in which to regulate this from our perspectives, right? So this now new division between two blocks on the basis of digital security is something that we will have to, in real time, deal with. Briefly then, these are, I think, some of the disruptive factors of 2024. And as I said, 2024 is going to be a year of disruptions. It's not going to be a year that is presenting us with a new order that we will all agree with. But it is also an exciting year for the ways in which many new positions will be consolidated and the new spaces for control of global narratives emerges. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your valuable insights. And it was a pleasure listening to you. And I would just like to make a very quick query that I mean, it's also related to my research work. How do you see the global push for sustainable development and the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources influencing international relations and geopolitical strategies? I heard that you have already emphasized on it, but I would like to, hear about this in details. And how exactly do you see this, the global push for the energy transition?
Do you want to answer that now, or do you want to have everybody speak and then take questions?
Just one quick question.
Okay. All right. Well, the race for alternative energy is very much a competitive race, right? As has always been the race for energy. Okay. I mean, the control that US and British companies had over Middle Eastern oil, that has a history that gives you many good examples of why control of energy is important, right? That's very important. But I think what's equally important is that as a part of that, because renewable energy requires different kinds of materials, right? So there is now a race for these materials, whether it's cobalt in Africa, whether it's deep sea mining, and other materials that we will need, right? The whole issue of chips and batteries, for example. I mean, this is something that that is already evident to us, right? So the whole chip war between the US and China, for example, the fact that Taiwanese companies are, leading in chip manufacturers, all of these impact global economic decisions, and they also impact global economic competitiveness. As China has understood, and I think as all of us in the developing world or the developed world understand, whoever has the control of science and technology and cutting edge technology will have the power. Which is interesting actually, because if you look at then the structure of power shifts, this may not necessarily always be large countries with large natural resources. This could also be smaller countries with higher investments in science and technology, like South Korea, for example, Finland, for example. So we are looking at the emergence of a whole range of other powers rather than just the major powers, which will impact the kind of debates we have, the kind of competitiveness we have, the kind of, the kind of confrontations we have around, new forms of energy.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you. It's really nice hearing your perspective about the film. I would now like to invite Ambassador Suri for his views. Uh, Thank you, Professor, and welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. And I've been asked to speak on President Xi Jinping's recent visit to Europe, and from there to discuss the US elections and the quadrangular geopolitics covering the US, Russia, Europe, and China. Since then, there have been important developments, and I intend to cover in some detail President Putin's visit to Beijing. I think it's as relevant as the rest of the subject. And some of my presentation is going to perhaps fill in some of the blanks in Professor Bhalla's very detailed presentation, but obviously only some, because her coverage is far more extensive than the topic given to me. Let me, however, begin by using this opportunity to convey my condolences to Professor Dr. Avinash Golbole on the loss of his mother. Our deepest condolences to him, and thank him for organizing this particular session. There have been some important developments in recent weeks, I think, which should be taken into account in discussing the drivers of geopolitics in 2024. Many of these relate to ongoing crises, but I think should be borne in mind. The first is the announcement of UK elections earlier this week by Prime Minister Sunak. And these will be on the 4th of July. But what is interesting from what he said is that in his announcement of the elections, he made it very clear that foreign policy is going to be a very important part of the election process. And what exactly did he say? Let me quote, "This election will take place at a time when the world is more dangerous than it has been since the end of the Cold War. Putin's Russia is waging a brutal war in Ukraine and will not stop there if he succeeds. That war has made it all too clear the risk to our energy security. In the Middle East, the forces of Islamist extremism threaten regional and ultimately global stability. These tensions are exploited by extremists who seek to undermine our values and seek to divide our values here at home. China is looking to dominate the 21st century by stealing a lead in technology, and migration is being weaponized by hostile states to threaten the integrity of our borders." I dare say these objectives will be shared by most of Europe and certainly by the United States. The other 3 or 4 issues I think we need to bear in mind is the death of President Raisi of Iran, the recognition by Norway, Ireland, and Spain of Palestine, and this will have implications for what is happening in Palestine, and the ICC notices, ICJ and ICC notices on the Palestine conflict, and finally the taking charge of by the new president in Taiwan, and the military exercises unleashed by China around the entire island. So China is obviously bothering the United States and its allies. China's support for Russia and Ukraine has become a major bone of contention in its relations with the West. So has the creation or the possible creation of this new de facto grouping called CRIC, China, Russia, Iran, and Korea, an amalgamation of convenience for the moment, but we need to see and study its evolution. In effect, the world is at a dangerous crossroads, and the post-World War II, and indeed the post-Cold War international order, is at best fraying rapidly. The irony to my mind is that none of this need have happened if the United States in particular, along with its NATO and G7 allies, had not gone for an overkill for near complete domination post the end of the Cold War. It's worth recalling what former Chancellor Merkel said some months ago, that the Cold War never really ended. The United States and its allies misread the developments emanating from greater globalization and began to believe that economics would trump over security and sovereignty and territorial integrity issues. Both Russia and China proved them wrong. The global financial and economic crisis and COVID-19 upended most calculations and Russia's war in Ukraine and the subsequent wide-ranging unilateral sanctions imposed by the US and its allies have virtually destabilized and begun to fragment the international UN Charter-based order. An order in which both Russia and China have vetoes in the UN Security Council and most UN activities. The WTO has been undermined by the US and China both. The latter succeeded because the West and others benefited from China's misuse till the water began flowing over their heads. Critical issues of the global commons remain unresolved or virtually unintended because of developments in the last 15 years and China deciding to take off the velvet glove. Xi Jinping's visit to France, Serbia, and Hungary has to be seen in the above context. Europe has been and is seen by China as being a critical partner for the economic, financial, technological, and strategic stability aspects. The European Union and China are theoretically strategic partners, but this relationship has soured in recent years because of China's mercantilist policies and efforts to divide the European Union. Pushback has been sharp, particularly in recent years. Xi Jinping's choice of countries during this visit to Europe was not random, but strategic. Let me briefly elaborate. First, France. France is China's fundamental anchor in Europe. It's a very old relationship. You will recall that some of the older Chinese communist leaders were actually educated in France. France follows an independent approach, which China greatly appreciates. It is a critical player in the European Union and even in NATO. France also enjoys this advantage of the special relationship with China. It gives its leverage. I'll have more to say on this as we go along. Why did he choose Serbia? You will notice that Serbia has been defined as an ironclad friend of China. I think Serbia was selected for a variety of reasons, including the fact that NATO had attacked the Chinese embassy in Belgrade in 1999. Serbia provides land connectivity for China's BRI projects. It is a potential European Union member, and it supports China's global development initiative, the global security initiative, and the global cultural initiative. So therefore, Serbia is special to China for a variety of reasons. So to Hungary. It is Xi Jinping's second visit to Hungary in 15 years. And it marks the 75th anniversary of China-Hungary diplomatic relations. I think there were several reasons why Hungary was chosen. Some of them are obviously known, but I would focus on some slightly different reasons. First, the BRI and connectivity that Hungary, support for BRI and connectivity to Europe that Hungary provides for China for its overland traffic to the European Union. Second, the famous or infamous China, Central Europe and East Europe group of countries which the Chinese had set up has begun to lose its importance because the European Union clearly saw through the process of Chinese wanting to divide the European Union. But it's a process that the Chinese want to keep alive. If they can help use Hungary to divide the European Union, so be it. Besides, Hungary is already in the European Union and can certainly influence decisions taken within the councils of the European Union. Surprisingly, and maybe this is perhaps not accurate, but at least what is available in the public domain, the Serbians did not fully support the GDI, GSI, and GCI of Xi Jinping. They referred simply to saying that they pay particular attention to these initiatives. The limitation with Hungary, however, is that it cannot push far to beyond the European Union positions. Let me now turn in some greater detail to the specifics of the visits. The most important leg of the visit was namely France. This was Xi Jinping's third visit to France. Each one has marked an anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations. The 50th, 55th, and this time the 60th. I think there is significance in that. It is symbolic of the representation of the importance, that China attaches to France. There has been a lot of commentary that there was no joint statement issued after the visit to France. But please bear in mind that 4 subject statements were issued on the Middle East, on AI and global governance. And we've already heard from Ambassador Bhalla, Professor Bhalla, how important this is going to be. On biodiversity and the oceans, she referred to this again, and to agriculture exchanges and cooperation. And it's important to bear in mind how important agriculture has become for China from the self-sufficiency point of view, and from the point of view of increasing the nutritional value available to its population. Besides, 20 bilateral cooperation agreements were signed covering green development, aviation, agricultural, food and commerce, and people-to-people exchanges. To my mind, there was a substantive outcome of the visit. There was, however, negative aspects to the visit, and the negative heavy lifting was done on trade and investment issues, and actually even on Ukraine and the Middle East by the President of the European Commission, Madam von der Leyen. It's interesting that this time Chancellor Scholz did not join the discussions with von der Leyen and Macron with Xi Jinping. And I think this was a sign of weakness in terms of European unity. And we all know why, because the Germans are particularly keen to sustain their economic partnership with China. Von der Leyen made it clear that this was her 3rd meeting with Xi Jinping in just over 1 year. You will recall that she is the author of the so-called process of de-risking, which the EU has announced, as against what was earlier intended of namely decoupling. I think, as we all know, de-risking has now become the favored process because decoupling with China from China seems to be far more difficult to achieve. She raised 3 important aspects on the trade and investment side with Xi Jinping and got no real responses. First, Chinese subsidized products. Second, the need for reciprocal access to each other's markets. And third, to improve the resilience of European supply chains. On the economic aspect, she made it very clear, and let me quote, Europe will not waver from making tough decisions needed to protect its economic and security. Now, on the political issues of Ukraine and the war and the Middle East, I'd like to quote from what von der Leyen said herself in her statement after the talks with Xi Jinping. I think this is important because she reflected the position of most EU countries, not necessarily all. She said, we discussed China's commitment not to provide any lethal equipment to Russia in the Ukraine war. More effort is needed to curtail delivery of dual-use goods to Russia that find their way to the battlefield. And given the existential nature of the threat stemming from this war for both Ukraine and Europe, this does affect EU-China relations. On the situation in the Middle East, which she described as of great concern for both of us, she underlined that no effort can be spared in de-escalating tensions and preventing a wider conflict in the region. She also made it clear that the EU is concerned about Iran's direct threat to stability in the region, and the EU believes that China can play an important role in limiting the irresponsible proliferation of Iranian ballistic missiles and drones. To assess the Xi Jinping visit to France, Serbia, and Hungary, let me take the easy option. And I'm taking this option because I basically agree with this assessment. And let me quote from the Le Monde. The Le Monde, in an editorial on 10th of May on the visit, said, and I quote, China likes to claim that it wants a strong Europe. Nothing could be further from the truth. Its aim is to weaken Western democracies, thereby undermining the transatlantic relationship as much as possible, and even the European Union itself. Strong words. In an op-ed, the Le Monde on the 11th of May assessed the Xi Jinping visit in the following words, and I quote, mission accomplished. Given China's ambitions, this was probably the dominant feeling in the Chinese presidential plane as it took off from Budapest on Friday, 10th May. The trip, which took the Chinese president to France, then Serbia and Hungary, principally enabled him to display the commercial and geopolitical objectives of Chinese power without offering any concessions to the leaders of the European Union. On the war in Ukraine, when asked not to support Russia's war effort, she did the minimum required in private, then took offense in public at the fact that this could be used to blacken the image of China or even incite a new Cold War. Finally, the op-ed says, efforts who thought the Chinese president was ready to flatter Europe's strategic autonomy in order to drive a wedge with the United States and reinforce his idea of a multipolar world would have been proven wrong. Xi's multipolar world is first and foremost a world with Chinese features. As I mentioned earlier, I broadly share this assessment of the visit to France, Xi Jinping's visit to France, Serbia, and Hungary. Let me now turn to the visit of President Putin to China on the 15th of this month. To my mind, this was a significant visit. It is the first visit made by Mr. Putin after his re-election to his new term. In the interactions as reported, mutuality of benefit, and I stress mutuality of benefit, was underlined. Putin specifically recalled that the former Soviet Union was the first to recognize the People's Republic of China on 2nd October 1949, the day after its declaration of independence. He also made clear that the former Soviet Union provided substantial assistance to the People's Republic of China at the initial stage of the development of its political system, state institutions, and the economy. The suggestion that the Russian Federation, excuse me, is now a junior partner of the People's Republic of China clearly rankles with Mr. Putin. A very long joint statement is issued. The length represents a set of signposts on the route to the further comprehensive development of Russia-China relations. Importantly, though, it also contains critical principles and concerns on the basis of which the relationship is developed. These also represent a careful balance of give and take. Xi Jinping spelled out that the relationship is based on, and I quote, demonstrating mutual respect and firm commitment to supporting each other on matters dealing with core interests of both sides, unquote. He went on to say, dealing with each other on the basis of respect and equality and addressing each other's current concerns. These are no doubt Ukraine and Taiwan, respectively. For his part, Mr. Putin noted that the joint statement is significant because it sets new objectives and long-term directives for addressing the entire spectrum of Russia-China relations. I would like to highlight 14 elements from the joint statement. I'm going to ask you to bear with me on this because these will have a significant bearing on the subject of discussion. First, need for maintaining national sovereignty and stability and promoting development and revitalization. So the objectives have been very clearly spelled out. Second, both sides will continuously improve the ability and levels of the two sides to jointly respond to risks and challenges. Third, international obligations regarding the immunity of state and their property, including sovereign reserves, must be strictly observed. This is clearly a reference to the intention of the G7 to use Russia's central bank resources, which are held in their banks, for rebuilding Ukraine, etc. Fourth, both Russia and China are willing to promote inclusive and open globalization. Xi Jinping clarified what this means, and he talked about emergence of economic globalization based on genuine multilateralism. Fifth, to jointly maintain the stability and security of industrial and supply chains, again, a subject of great current interest and vulnerability for both these countries. Sixth, both condemn circumvention of UN Security Council and violation of WTO rules, etc. In effect, they want to benefit from the so-called rules-based order, but the rules-based order, which is strictly based on the UN Charter, and multilaterally negotiated instruments. Seventh, the Russian side highly appreciates the Global Development Initiative and will continue to participate in the group of friends. This is an important concession for the Chinese, and particularly for Xi Jinping. Seventh, need to ensure, and this is very important, need to ensure global strategic stability, which is defined as being equal and indivisible. And in this context, they express, and I quote here, serious concern about US attempts to undermine strategic stability in order to maintain its absolute military superiority, unquote, including through deployment of land-based intermediate-range missile systems in the Asia Pacific. This poses, and I quote again, a direct military threat to China and Russia, and these two countries will strengthen cooperation and coordination to respond to the US so-called dual containment policy towards China and Russia, which is neither constructive and is not constructive and is hostile, unquote. China and Russia have announced that they oppose the use of outer space for military purposes and that they will fight against terrorism. And here the Chinese have obtained the concession from the Russians and with a specific reference to the ETIM. The two countries will work together on AI, cybersecurity, and information security. 11th, Ukraine, and here the formulation is significant. The need is to find a political solution through diplomatic means and dialogue, and the two sides noted that, and I quote, to steadily resolve the Ukraine crisis, it is necessary to eliminate the root causes of the crisis, abide by the principles of indivisible security, and take into account the legitimate security interests and concerns of all countries, unquote. 12th, in the current geopolitical context, it is necessary to explore the establishment of a sustainable security system in the Eurasian space based on the principles of equal and indivisible security. You can see the shades of the global security initiative reflected here. 13th, it is pointed out that the US Indo-Pacific strategy and the destructive action that NATO intends to take in the Asia-Pacific region have a negative impact on the peace and stability of the region. AUKUS impacts the strategic stability in the Asia-Pacific in various ways. And finally, and this again is important, the two sides, and I quote, stress that China and the CSTO, the Central Security Treaty Organization of Russia and the Central Europeans, and have potential for cooperation in maintaining peace and security in the Eurasian region and jointly responding to external challenges. So the intention is to enhance the security partnership and to extend its scope if feasible. In effect, China and Russia wish to become dominant players in Eurasia. It is no longer simply a question of European stability. Let me turn very, very briefly to the US elections because I'm going to run out of time very soon also. Irrespective of who's voted into power in November, whether it's Mr. Biden stays in power or Mr. Trump is elected, I think the state of our bilateral relations is such that we will deal with either president. I believe that we have enough contacts with the administration which may come into power if Mr. Trump is elected to try and ensure that our interests going forward will be sustained. I think the partnership has reached a stage which is, at least from our perspective, something which we have to now nurture in a very significant manner, irrespective of who's in power in Washington, in the White House. The whole world is likely in a quandary over the outcome of the US presidential elections. The current geopolitical situation has only exacerbated the gravity of the problem, but at the same time underlying the fact that the US remains the predominant power in the world. Its power may be waning, but it is determined to change that trend, and through its rejuvenated economic, financial, technological muscle and capabilities, attempt to reverse that trend while fully leveraging the growing strength of the Indo-Pacific. The United States has no intention, to my mind, of letting Europe go and wishes to remain a Eurasian power via the NATO route. Will Trump's approach be different? In my view, not if the US deep state can help that. Europe without a US-led NATO will become like a toothless tiger for long, and after the Ukraine war, that is not a chance that it will wish to take in the near term until strategic stability is restored in Europe. And now with talk of Eurasian strategic stability, it remains to be seen how the two will be put together and how a suitable gelling will happen. China poses no immediate military security threat to Europe, but a Russian victory in Ukraine, made possible by a Russia-China alliance, cannot but change that reality, and hence the de-risking process that has been set in place by the European Union and most of its members. At the same time, China is already known to be targeting EU countries' elections and technological and defense establishments through cyber and other means. You would all have seen the recent reports on the effort by the Chinese to impact the forthcoming European Parliament elections. China sees Eurasia as part of its extended hinterland and will want very much to be a player in any new strategic balance structure in Europe, either directly or in coordination with Russia. Will the US and NATO allow that? Seems unlikely. It is irrespective of who wins the US elections. Nor will the European Union want that. Unless, of course, China turns a new leaf. But then who knows whether that will ever happen. Both the United States and the EU and NATO should perhaps focus on weakening the Russia-China alliance. This may, in the current circumstances, require the West to make unpalatable concessions to Russia. The question is really, how big is the nature of the current and potential threat from China? There is no consensus yet on this in the West. This leaves countries like India in an ever deeper quandary. Let me stop at that point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, thank you so much, Ambassador. It was a detailed perspective on a wide range of subjects, including the UK and the US elections, and focusing on the China-France relationship. It was actually indeed a great perspective that we heard from your side. I would now like to invite Ambassador Kanta for sharing his thoughts on the major drivers of the geopolitics for 2024. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you, Nikita. Let me first of all thank Jindal Global University for inviting me to participate in this webinar. And let me also convey my condolences to both Avinash and Kunjan for their bereavement. Professor Madhu Bhalla and Nalin Suri have already covered a whole lot of ground, so I'll try avoid repeating what they have already said. Let me flag about 12, 13 sort of propositions with regard to the world today, which is in transition, and what are the drivers, geopolitical drivers, in the year 2024. The first point I would like to make is that the world has also Indo-Pacific, Asia-Pacific region is between orders. As you know, there was a brief unipolar moment after the end of Cold War. That has not been replaced by a bipolar world, as many strategists in China, like Professor Yan Shetong, argue, because rise of China is taking place along with rise of many other countries, including India. So there is a much greater dispersal of economic, military, and diplomatic power today, which cannot possibly be sort of described under the construct of a bipolar world. So something like multiplex that Professor Bhalla referred to earlier, which is absence of hegemony, and you have a whole lot of consequential players impacting the current situation. It's a sort of transition towards multipolarity, which hasn't taken place yet. So it remains a world in between orders. And India would like to emerge as a significant pole in the multipolar world in the making, and like to exercise strategic autonomy even while it seeks to balance the rise of China, which has negative implications for us in terms of China's aggressive behavior. This is the first point I wanted to make. Second point that again has been referred to by both Madhu and Nalin, that what we have today is a world characterized by multiple conflicts. Two most important conflicts, of course, are one, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That war has already entered the third year, and then you have, Israeli offensive in the Gaza Strip, which is also in the 8th month. Both have very significant implications. I'll not go into that, but I would like to highlight 2 points there. One, US preoccupation with the European theater and with the Middle East has sort of reduced the bandwidth for its pivot to Indo-Pacific. The pivot to Asia, you'll recall, started in 2011 under the Barack Obama administration. Didn't make much headway at that time. But subsequently, under Trump administration and Biden administration, we have seen, construct of Indo-Pacific developing. But USA is increasingly a distracted power, also going through a fairly pronounced dysfunctional phase in its domestic politics. So I think we have to see its limitations in terms of how much time, energy, and resources it can devote to Indo-Pacific. We have to bear that in mind. A second point is that which Professor Bhalla referred to. You have preoccupation with the European theater and the Middle East, but other conflicts which are taking place, whether in Sudan or Yemen and elsewhere in Africa, they are getting completely ignored. So one can see double standards on part of the West, even when it deals with the Ukrainian conflict and the Israeli offensive in Gaza Strip. This is leading to a lot of misgivings in the global South, which is feeling ignored. So this is a development we'll have to keep an eye on, and this will continue. So India rightly focused on concerns and preoccupations of global South during its presidency of G20, and going ahead, I think that focus needs to be maintained. Third point, which is again very obvious, that this is a year of elections. Perhaps never before in the past we had so many elections taking place in the same year. According to one count, 64 countries plus EU are going through elections this year. For us, of course, the most consequential elections are those taking place in India, and results will be out next week. Globally, the most important elections are presidential elections in the USA. Nalin talked about it. I will not dwell in any further. But there are significant implications. If Biden gets re-elected, there will be greater continuity. If there is Trump 2.0 administration, there will be greater unpredictability. We are relatively well off, as Ambassador Suri brought out, because we do have sort of bipartisan support behind a closer strategic engagement with India in the USA. So I don't think our interest will be seriously affected, no matter how presidential elections in Washington, D.C. Pan out come this November. Fourth point is one about US-China strategic rivalry, which sort of came to the fore during Trump administration. In fact, he took called a spade, something which was being ignored by previous US administrations, which expected that somehow, China would become more like them. In India, we never had any such illusions. Donald Trump, in his own way, called out China. And the Biden administration has pursued that policy. And the strategic contestation is now fairly baked into US global policy, including its stance towards China. It's unlikely to change, no matter what's the outcome of presidential elections in the USA this November. At the same time, we have to acknowledge that after a period of high tension early last year, when we had the balloon incident, the USA and China have engaged in very close dialogue, which culminated in Woodside, California summit between President Joe Biden and President Xi Jinping. And they have managed to bring relations back on rails, so to say, restore a modicum of stability in the relationship. USA is pursuing the policy of managed competition with China. China doesn't quite accept that construct, but it has gone along. So we have seen, a relative thaw in tensions between the USA and China over the last few months. But structural challenges in Sino-US relations remain unchanged. So strategic contestation will not go away. In fact, it will be the defining feature of the global geopolitical landscape for the foreseeable future. The bottom line is that the USA is the established hegemon, China is the wannabe or aspirant hegemon, and that contradiction will not go away. So that will continue to shape our geopolitical context for quite some time. But what we have seen that for its own reasons, China has not only reached out to the USA, but also to the EU, Japan, Australia, ROK, and Vietnam. So there has been, certain sort of amelioration of tensions in China's relations with those countries. For instance, we just had, as Nalin mentioned, a visit of President Xi to Europe. First, since 2019, we are going to have the first trilateral summit involving China, Japan, and ROK. Once again, first in last 5 years. China is making a very determined effort to create sort of a wedge between the USA and its allies in Europe and in Indo-Pacific. To what extent it will succeed? It's debatable, because those other countries also have very serious concerns about China's behavior, including context of support given by China to Russia in its invasion of Ukraine. But one point we need to note here, that China's current charm offensive, we can call its tactical sort of repositioning as a charm offensive, doesn't quite extend to India. So India is an outlier. China hasn't reached out to us. I'll briefly touch upon India-China relations later. USA also has continued to invest in its strategic alignment through AUKUS, Quad, IPEF, more recently trilateral summit arrangements involving Japan and Korea, and Japan and the Philippines. Most recently, last week, on 21st May, we had tariffs on imports worth $18 billion from China, imposed by President Biden, covering areas like electric vehicles to steel and aluminum products to solar panels. So I think that those pressure points will be maintained, even while an effort is made to put in place guardrails so that differences do not degenerate into military conflict. At this point of time, neither the USA nor China is interested in a military conflict. So they would take steps to prevent that. So that will involve taking certain sort of, as I said, guardrails, assumption of certain dialogue mechanisms. In this context, increasingly the West is looking at China-Russia strategic alignment as conjoint with their own strategic contestation with China. We, of course, have a different assessment of where Russia and its place in the world. I'm not going to that. Ambassador has already talked about it. But I'll question the construct of China, Russia, Iran, DPRK axis that sort of exaggerates China's ability to sort of dictate policy choices to these countries, which would like to maintain their agency on various issues, even while they seek, alignment or common position on specific issues with China. Next point I would like to highlight, and this is something which is affecting stability in Indo-Pacific region very substantially, is China's gray zone operations in 4 theaters. Taiwan Strait, South China Sea, East China Sea, and India-China borders. If you look at Chinese behavior, there is a pattern, very distinct underlying pattern. China is seeking to incrementally change facts on the ground or in the water, seeking to realize its unilaterally declared territorial and other core interests while staying under the threshold of an outright military conflict, which it doesn't want at this point of time, whether with the USA or with countries in Southeast Asia or with India for that matter. But in differing degrees, it has managed to achieve its objective, most significantly in South China Sea, where over the last decade, it has fundamentally changed the ground situation through creation of artificial islands, their militarization, and by enforcement of its so-called domestic jurisdiction in these contested waters, which are in fact international waters and not internal lake of China, as China pretends. Its behavior has been completely in violation of international law, including the award given by International Court of Arbitration in 2016, which you'd recall went in favor of the Philippines and against China. Next point I would like to highlight is that while these tensions, contradictions, rivalries will continue to characterize the geopolitical landscape, both in our region and globally, we are not at present heading towards an outright military conflict. The so-called Thucydides trap, where to my mind is a misplaced hypothesis. There's nothing preordained about the USA and China getting into a military conflict. Likewise, the talk of a new Cold War breaking out today, I'm not really persuaded, because there are very significant differences in Sino-US relationship today compared to the Cold War years when the USA and Soviet Union engaged in competition. During Cold War years, there was very little economic engagement between the two blocs. There were proxy wars going on, supported by the USA and Soviet Union. We don't have either. Today, as you know, China is deeply integrated in the global marketplace. It has trade worth almost $700 billion with the USA. And there are no proxy wars being supported by the USA and China. And likewise, the systemic rivalry which characterized Cold War is all much in evidence today. So China is trying to sort of project its own universe through initiatives like BRI, Global Security Initiative, Global Development Initiative, Global Civilization Initiative, whereas USA has its own so-called rules-based international order. But so far, China has not been able to make a significant dent in terms of projection of its sort of model, even though Xi Jinping has talked about on many occasions, including in his work statement at the 20th Party Congress. Let me quickly, mention here some of the things which are not likely and which are not working out today. For instance, a pan-Asian security architecture. I don't see much scope for that. Likewise, Xi Jinping's construct of Asia for Asians, that also is not getting much traction. I talked about rules-based order. The hypocrisy of this position has been laid bare through the position taken by West on conflicts in the European theater, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and what Israel is doing in the Middle East. Double standards pursuit has led to a lot of anxieties, especially in the global South. So today, when it comes to global commons, space available for cooperation has shrunk very dramatically. So at best, we can have cooperation in niche areas. So big initiatives, including on climate change, in terms of what can be implemented, room for cooperation is very limited. We saw that during the COVID pandemic, how little collaboration took place, how ineffective organizations like WHO were, or when it comes to various conflicts, how ineffectual UN Security Council has been. Madhu has talked about non-traditional threats to regional security. That's one point. I would not go into that. I want to talk about it earlier. But I would like to highlight one aspect which should get more attention. That is role of non-state players and role of mega companies. We saw during the Hamas terrorist strike against Israel on 7th October last year, how it triggered a major conflict with massive humanitarian fallout. We also saw subsequently that Professor Bhalla referred to, Houthis, their attack on strikes against shipping in Red Sea and Western Arabian Sea, how they managed to, create very serious problems for maritime shipping, raise the cost of shipping, notwithstanding interventions by countries like the USA and UK, which is struck against Houthis, or even deployment of nearly a dozen naval assets by India in that part of the world. But the challenge continued. Likewise, the role of mega companies, it's going to get more space and attention as you move ahead. I'll just give you an example of the Ukraine conflict. Microsoft intervened in a very significant way to provide support to Ukraine, both in cyber offense and cyber defense, something which has not been talked about much, played a critical role. What has been talked about more is the role of SpaceX Starlinks, which played a critical role in Ukrainian sort of response to the Russian invasion. And these cases, these big companies decided to do things not necessarily with support of the concerned governments. Sometimes, for instance, if you recall 6 January 2020, when there was the so-called insurrection involving the attack on the US Capitol, then President Donald Trump was deplatformed by Twitter, by Facebook, even though he was a serving president. So, these are trends which are evolving, and they will play a very important role down the road. Non-state players, whether they are groups like Hamas or companies like X and SpaceX and Facebook, China realizes that when it had its crackdown against technology companies like Alibaba and Tencent, one important consideration was its concern that these companies are acquiring influence beyond the control of the Communist Party of China, and that was not acceptable to the CPC. And so it struck down, even though against these companies, even though it had a negative impact on the Chinese economy. Since then, they managed to put in place structure under which these companies are co-opted in CPC's scheme of things. They are in a way assisting in promoting strategic objectives of CPC. So China has handled this issue differently. Let me just mention 2-3 other points before I conclude. One, atomic security. This was referred to by 2 previous speakers also. We are witnessing the securitization of economy on a scale which has not been seen earlier. So today, whenever we have discussion on geopolitics and the impact on regional stability, the aspect of atomic security has to be borne in mind. One big takeaway of COVID pandemic was the growing realization that there's need for decreasing dependencies on certain players, especially China in that case, in the global value chain, and move towards more diversified, more resilient value chain, even if it is less efficient. So the world of just in time clearly was left behind us because security consideration became more important. And we are witnessing a major restructuring of global value chain. The whole process of de-risking, which is panning out, it's going to be difficult, but it will take place. The latest evidence I talked about was tariffs imposed by President Biden on 21st May. And Donald Trump, in fact, he said that if he becomes president, he's confident he will become president, he'll impose a tariff of 60% on all imports from China, and also sort of prevent the rerouting through countries like Mexico by imposing a tariff of 200% on imports of Chinese goods produced in those countries. So we are going to witness major changes. And how do we deal with that as a country? How do we emerge as a major node in global value chain? I think that's going to be a very important opportunity and challenge. So because global value chains are being fundamentally restructured. And in this process, the technology is emerging as a very major area of contestation. You will recall a speech given by US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan at the Brookings Institution on 27th April last year, when he talked about small yard, tall fence, that in certain areas, will deny technology to China. And semiconductors, they took that step, and that is being expanded. So no longer the yard is so small, it's getting expanded. Artificial intelligence, for instance, they're doing the best to slow down technological advancement of China. Likewise, in case of quantum computing. So that contestation in the domain of technology will intensify. And that will also create opportunities for countries like India, because they're looking to reduce centrality of China in global value chain and in technological networks which have developed, especially since China's accession to WTO some 24 years ago. Another aspect here which we must pay attention to is that the industrial policy is back with a vengeance. It's China which started that process with Making China 2025. which was unveiled in May 2015. But since then, the USA has borrowed very heavily from China's playbook. You're all aware of Chips and Science Act, of Inflation Reduction Act. Uh, they are investing heavily in creating domestic capabilities and onshoring and friendshoring. And India is also doing in its own way through our, PLI production-linked incentive schemes, which has been launched in 14 sectors. Again, this is going to be a difficult, complex, protracted process. It's not going to go away. So we are going to see more of industrial policy. We are going to see more of protectionism. Professor Bhalla referred to, deglobalization. It may not be deglobalization, but will have sort of globalization under pressure, where protectionism will become, is in fact already has become more rampant with tariffs being introduced. Today, for instance, when it comes to electric vehicles, Chinese will not be able to sell electric vehicles in China, in USA, which is the second largest auto market, because 100% tariffs have been introduced on import of EVs from China. European countries, EU are also in the process of taking similar measures, because there is concern that in the so-called three new, that is electric vehicles, solar panels and modules, and the lithium-ion batteries, what Xi Jinping described as advanced productive forces. China has developed overcapacities. It will be able to sort of inundate markets abroad in a way that might lead to deindustrialization, much the same way there was deindustrialization and lower value added products in the USA earlier. But deindustrialization in high-tech manufacturing will not be acceptable to the West, and likewise, it should not be acceptable to India either. So we'll have to take appropriate countervailing measures in India as well. This also will lead to fragmentation of the global market. It's already happening. As I mentioned, the EVs, it's happening. It's already happening in 5G telephony, where companies like Huawei and ZTE have been kept out by USA, by India, by Australia, and many other countries. And this trend will become more and more prominent as we look ahead. Finally, let me briefly touch upon India-China relations. We are going to have a new government. There may be likelihood continuity in governance. Yet, I believe that there's a need to sort of see if we can try and get out of the current stalemate in our relations with China without sacrificing our interests on issues relating to territory. It's not going to be easy at all, but the present situation is also not desirable. Deployment of troops in such large numbers along the borders, the fact that dialogue mechanisms, whether at track 1 or track 2 levels, have largely broken down. So need to resume, dialogue, more strategic engagement with China without moving away from the position we have taken that the state of borders will determine the state of overall relations. How we do it is going to be difficult, but we should also, we'll have to see that how do we reduce our dependencies on China, especially in sensitive areas. I'll stop here. I'm very happy to respond to any questions we may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Kanta. It was really, really, it was really, you shed light on a lot of things. You shed light on the ongoing conflicts, the proxy wars, the economic security, the Indo-Pacific arena, the US elections, and obviously the technological impacts, like the technological significance, like the semiconductor, lithium-ion batteries. I would really like to thank you for your enlightening presentation. I would like to move on to the question and answers. we have a few questions in the chat box, and I would like to start with the first question that we have in our chat box. It is from Kopal Jain. It is she hasn't specifically mentioned to whom she wants to ask this question, so I would really like to ask the panelist who would like to answer this question. So the question goes like, what do you think is the future of free speech as we see even Western democracies clamp down on such values? So, yes, Ambassador Suri, please.
I think my answer is very simple. We have to do everything possible to protect free speech. It's not going to be easy. I think there are forces that play both in settled democracies and obviously in the other part of the world where there is no democracy to prevent free speech from happening. But I think progress without free speech is simply not feasible beyond a point. And if you want something enough, you have to fight for it. I think this is a message I'd like to address, particularly to the younger generation. You had things come rather easy to you. I'm not trying to be facetious or superficial, but each generation benefits from what the previous generation has developed and built upon. And I think the tradition of free speech, particularly in a country like India, must be sustained irrespective. You cannot have a functioning democracy in a country like ours without free speech. Obviously, there will have to be limits to free speech. There's that old English saying about the old man saying to the young man twirling his umbrella that your freedom ends where my nose begins. But I think subject to that, there must be robust rules which should not be violated. And this will apply particularly now, I think, to social media. And as AI comes into play in a bigger and bigger way, this is going to be a very big issue. And I think the answers have also to come from the younger generation, because you are the ones who are technologically much more savvy than our lot. We are followers, we're not creators by and large. I think Professor Bala wants to come in on this.
I just had an answer to Popal Jain's question in your chat box. And my answer was essentially this, that as you see nationalist governments coming to power, and as you see populations being securitized, right, free speech will be the first domino to fall. And the regulation of AI and ICT firms needs to be debated by civil society so that safeguards to free speech can be part of the regulations legislated, right? So unless civil society is very, what we say in Hindi, satark, or very alive to what is happening, and here I mean not just the older civil society organizations, institutions run by more elderly people, but civil society in which young people participate, unless they are very alive to what is happening, to what, why the constraints that are coming in or can possibly come in and can be easily legislated by states. They must participate in this debate on regulatory mechanisms for the ICT and AI, which is why this coming summit in the United Nations in September is very, very significant. Especially for the participation of civil society and other watchdog institutions, right? And this is something I think we should be actually talking about a great deal more than we are talking about, because it's hugely significant for the directions that we will take. Thank you.
If I could just add a little bit on this, I'm happy that there are two questions on this issue. But we need to take the debate beyond free speech. When it comes to our own country, we have, certain norms and values and institutions enshrined in our constitution. Our founding fathers of the Republic had a certain idea of India, of tolerant India, pluralistic India, democratic India, secular India. I think defending those values is very important, both for our growth and for ensuring social cohesion, inclusivity, which are essential prerequisites for ensuring that we continue to emerge as a vibrant society, which looks after interest to all sections of society.
thank you, ambassadors, and thank you, Professor, for your insightful expertise on this. The next question is to Ambassador Kanta. It is, as geopolitical fabric is currently facing a watershed moment with the number of deviances from the previous world order, do you think that the state-sponsored espionage activities will increase in the coming years, and how?
That's already happening. State-sponsored espionage activities have been part of life where ever since the Westphalian system of states came into existence. But today, in a way, there are many more opportunities for states to engage in surveillance espionage, both domestically as also in engagement with other societies and countries. Technology has been a major enabler. I can give you an example of China, for instance. During zero COVID policy, they put in place a really extensive technological network for monitoring and implementing zero COVID policies, which were controversial, perhaps not entirely warranted. But those institutions haven't quite gone away. Today, you have facial recognition. You have, anyone going anywhere, doing anything, leaves a digital footprint behind, which is being monitored constantly. To a great extent, that's a risk in India as well, as we move towards a more digital society. And if there are concerns in USA, for instance, about China-made electronic vehicles being imported, one major consideration is that these vehicles are basically mobile surveillance devices because they can, gather so much data. We should have similar concerns in India as well. That's the reason why we kept 5G telephony of Chinese origin out of our network. So it's going to be a huge challenge for all of us. But where to strike the balance? You take care of risks emanating from surveillance and espionage. At the same time, try and ensure an open society. Finding the right balance is going to be a very challenging proposition.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your valuable insight on the question. There's another question, and it is not directed to any panelist as such. So I would again like to, whoever would like to take the question can. So it is, what do you think is Russia becoming a declining power as Russia is too dependent on China in terms of trade?
Well, I think all of us can take this question. If we are actually, first, we should not take a very simplistic view of China-Russia relations. It's a fact that Russia's dependence on China has gone up. And this, in fact, this process got accelerated not in 2022, but in 2014, when Russia seized Crimea. And it came under Western pressure. So I was in Beijing at that time. So one could see that how vulnerable Russia was. And like certain technologies or weapon systems, it was not prepared to share with China. It ended up giving to China. And the process has been accelerated following its invasion of Ukraine, when it has become more dependent on China. At the same time, I had mentioned in my opening remarks, we should not underestimate the agency of countries like Russia. Russia is a country with a sense of history, with a sense of destiny. It might be in a relatively vulnerable position at this point of time, but I don't think over a longer period it will ever become a junior partner of China. So it will maintain its autonomy. to maximum extent possible. So we need to take a more nuanced view of China-Russia relations and not make the mistake of looking at China and Russia as conjoined challenge as the Western countries are doing. We don't do that. We look at Russia very differently. Whereas China is, for us, the primary strategic challenge, Russia remains a friendly country, even though there are anxieties about certain aspects of Russia's growing relationship with China.
Thank you, Ambassador. I saw Ambassador Suri also wanted to say something about the topic. Yes, Ambassador Suri.
Well, I think Ambassador Kant has said most of what I was going to say, but just want to add a few points. I think Russia is such a inherently powerful country that it cannot just be written off as somebody's subsidiary partner. Current stage of weakness may be a temporary one, and I think I made it very clear in my presentation that during his recent visit to China, Putin made it very clear, reminded the Chinese of how that Soviet Union had actually helped China become what it is. I think that part should not be ignored. Even today, most of Chinese military technology has its basis in the help provided by the former Soviet Union and now currently Russia to them in many fields of activity. But the weak problem, I think, is not so much in Russia not wanting to be a junior partner or not having the potential to be a very independent major player. Don't forget, it is one of the country's largest nuclear weapon stockpiles in the world. It is a very rich country in terms of raw materials, in terms of scientific talent, etc. The problem with Russia has always been its domestic economy. And this problem remains. In fact, what is going to happen now is this problem is going to get compounded. As the Russian economy gets more and more militarized, focuses more and more on military production, I think that will bring into the fore weaknesses in the Russian economy. And I think the Russians are better aware of their own history than most of us are. And I'm sure that they'll find ways to restore the balance. And I think that is part of the reason why I think the Russians also seek, you would have seen the recent reports that President Putin has made it very clear, he's willing to talk of a settlement. Obviously, he's put forward conditions which the Ukrainians on the face of it right now cannot accept. But I think at some point in time, you will have a reasonable outcome where Ukraine will not get what it wants, Russia will not get what it wants, and you may have a cold peace, but it may happen. But I think that would then enable Russia to put its economy back on a normal track and start building on its own potential in terms of economic stability and growth. But I essentially agree with what Ambassador Khan said. I think Russia is not destined to be China's junior partner for a very large number of reasons. And as far as we are concerned, we have no objective reason not to be friendly with Russia. We have no outstanding problems with Russia.
Thank you, Ambassador, for answering the question. The next question is to Professor Bhalla. It goes like, as you mentioned, the geostrategic importance of oceans will be a crucial vector for analysis in 2024, with deep sea mining being a significant area of interest. Do you believe that ownership disputes over areas beyond EEZs could ignite new conflicts over resources like polymetallic nodules?
Thank you. Actually, the International Seabed Authority, which is behind the signing of UNCLOS, is responsible for the security and the preservation of the oceans beyond the EEZs, right? Now, of course, there are some countries that have not signed the UNCLOS, and that creates a problem. But within the EEZs, countries are free to mine, okay? The problem arises when countries dispute the lines of the EEZs. As for example, China does in the South China Seas. There are across the world 10 other disputes that are going on, many in the Mediterranean, Greece and Cyprus, Turkey and Cyprus, Lebanon and Cyprus, saying that they are the EEZs over conflict. So there are Italy, for example. So there are many other countries, Canada and the US as well, actually, in the Beaufort Sea. So many other countries have disputes on the EEZs, but none have acted as aggressively as China has in the South China Seas, right? Where it has refused to acknowledge the definitions of the EEZs as set down by UNCLOS and the ISA. And that constitutes a problem, and that is also the basis for conflict, right? Elsewhere, I think there are negotiations that go on, and many other, mediatory aspects come into play. But when you use military might, and you have a very clear target for military overreach, as China does, then that becomes a basis for conflict in areas beyond countries' EEZs, especially beyond China's EEZ, or an intrusion into other countries' EEZs, right? So that's what happens. But beyond that, beyond the EEZs, it is really the ISA that is responsible for this. And many countries, most countries are actually signatories to the ISA conventions. That's it.
Oh, thank you, Professor. There's just one follow-up question that I'd like to ask myself. China doesn't agree that, that they have signed a lot of treaties historically, and they say that we didn't sign it. How exactly can we address this issue? Like the global community can come up and address this issue, because then if we go like this, then there would be a lot of treaties and agreements that would just be not there, that would just go null and void. And if a lot of countries would join the, you know, uh, start bandwagoning China like this, so how exactly would we move forward in terms of the treaties and the global agreements that we have already signed?
Okay, the significance of signatures on global agreements or bilateral agreements actually relates to the context in which treaty is signed. China's contention is that these are all unequal treaties. It was not in a position of power when it was forced to sign these treaties, right? So its history of the narrative on unequal treaties is a long one. And in many respects, as with the West, in the 19th century and the early 20th century, these are valid disagreements, okay? As far as our border is concerned, where again, China says it did not sign the treaties, it will not accept colonial definitions of the border. These are very vexed questions, because in one sense, when you, for example, India, which was a state that took over power from the colonial, from the British, right? What was it supposed to accept? Was it supposed to accept the treaties that the earlier state had signed with the neighbors, or was it not supposed to accept them? Was it supposed to rework all of these treaties immediately? Or was it supposed to then say, well, this is the order and we will work with this one, right? So this is our dilemma, actually. And this is a dilemma that deals with how we look at history differently, okay? China's very, very long tradition has been in all of its political parties, including the Kuomintang before the communists came, to claim all of its historical territories. This is a position that Taiwan, the Kuomintang in Taiwan, and presumably other parties in Taiwan also profess. So in one sense, it's not just Beijing that talks about it. It is that's as a part of the narrative of the reconstruction of history. That is part of the Chinese, modern day narrative. They will have to find a way to deal with that, and we will have to find a way to deal with that. Essentially, China deals with that from a position of power. When it is not in a position of power, it makes agreements, right? In the early days, it sort of made an agreement with the Burmese. It made an agreement, subsequently with the Russians as well. So why not India? What is the problem with it? I think we need to ask them that, right?
Thank you, Professor.
Just to add, Nikita, just one short
Yes.
point
Yes,
that China has this habit of, as Professor Valla brought out, making these claims on historical territory which do not have any basis in facts or evidence. For instance, it's so-called nine-dash line. This matter came up before International Court of Arbitration, and the award given by International Court of Arbitration in 2016, it had very expressly and explicitly said that the claim of historical waters is without basis and to reject it. But China did not accept the award. Around the same time, we had another matter involving maritime, waters between India and Bangladesh going up to International Court of Arbitration. Award was not in our favor, but we accepted it, we implemented it. So it's also a question of how countries, behave, making unilateral territorial claims, as China is doing in different theaters, and then aggressively trying to realize those claims. And it has done in South China Sea, it's trying to do in Taiwan, and to less extent even along India-China borders. I think becomes a hugely destabilizing factor in our region. And this is something which is recognized increasingly by international community.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for answering the question. There are two more questions, and I would quickly like to ask. It is for Ambassador Suri. So, China's growing naval presence in Indian Ocean is a direct threat to Indian security. In 2018, India acquired sea-based nuclear triad capabilities. What other options India can leverage over China to match nuclear parity with China? And can we witness possible nuclearization of Indian Ocean in the near future?
That's quite a mouthful. Let me try and answer it, and I'm sure Ashok can add to my response. Both China and India are nuclear weapon states. Both of us possess a nuclear triad. China has certainly many more nuclear weapons than India does, and is on a course of enhancing the quantum of its nuclear weapons and its delivery systems in a very fundamental manner in the coming years. Some estimates would suggest that China will have upwards of 900 nuclear weapons, and we all know how developed and extensive their missile capabilities are. China is also building nuclear missile capable submarines on a very rapid pace. We are doing it at a much slower pace. So I think there is certainly a nuclear weapon imbalance. But the point is, nuclear weapons, we both possess nuclear weapons. Certainly India possesses nuclear weapons essentially as a deterrence. We have a very clear policy on this subject. Now, whether we should compete with China in this respect, I think is a difficult question to answer, but I think it's easy to say that we will need to enhance our nuclear weapon stockpile in the coming years, whether we like it or not. But that is the nature of this game, and the nature of this beast. It's not necessarily a very good game, but once you're in it, I think you're stuck in it. As far as the Indian Ocean is concerned, we have to bear in mind several factors. First, there is no shortage of nuclear weapon submarines sailing in the Indian Ocean over the years. They're doing it now, they will continue to do it. It's a free ocean. I mean, yes, it is the Indian Ocean. And the effort we have to do is to ensure that we are able to monitor what's happening in the Indian Ocean in a substantial and a substantive way, and not be subjected to surprises. I think we have in place systems that enable us to do that. And there are projects and capabilities which are being developed to ensure that these capabilities improve over time. Whether there should be a nuclear submarine rivalry in the Indian Ocean, I think so far the Chinese have not entered the Indian Ocean. The PLA Navy has not entered the Indian Ocean in a way that is that should give rise to too much fear at the present point in time. But their policies and their policies of establishing bases are such that we are quite certain that there will be a very substantial PLA Navy in the Indian Ocean in the years ahead. Now, we have to be prepared for that. I think, but at least from what little I know, the Indian Navy is working on that in a very significant manner, both in terms of capacity and also in terms of the ability to station our vessels and our submarines in other parts of the world, so that we can take into account all contingencies. Plus, we are very substantially developing our maritime domain awareness capacities through acquisition of these special aircraft. So I think it is certainly going to be a problem for us. We are aware of the problem, and I understand that the government is fully working on ways and means to ensure that we do not suffer any disability in this regard. But I think the nuclear weapon imbalance will continue for a while, and how we address that nuclear weapon and nuclear submarine imbalance is a matter of resources at the end of the day. Ashok, you might want to add to that.
Okay, just a couple of points. One, Indian Ocean is already nuclearized. As Masuri brought out, you have presence of nuclear submarines, both SSN, that is nuclear powered submarine, and SSBN, that is nuclear powered submarines carrying
nuclear weapons.
Both are deployed in Indian Ocean. So China also entered Indian Ocean with its submarines about a decade ago. And since then, there is a routine deployment of Chinese submarines in Indian Ocean. In fact, our Navy chief has gone on record saying that at any given point of time, you have presence of about half a dozen naval assets of PLA Navy in Indian Ocean. So that is a challenge we'll have to deal with, both in conventional domain and nuclear domain. Coming to China's nuclear weapon capability, there have been some disturbing developments over the last 4 years or so. Until 2019, U.S. Department of Defense, it comes out with this annual report on China's military capability. It was assessing that China had about 200 nuclear warheads. The report, which came out late last year, assessed that in May 2023, China already had 500 nuclear warheads, and the number will go up to 1,000 by 2030, and earlier report had suggested it will go up to 1,500 by 2035. So this is a sort of nuclear breakout which is happening. Why it's happening? There are a number of arguments on that. I'll not go into that. But it's not just a DoD report. It's also matched by, buttressed by, information available in public domain. For instance, satellite imagery on 3 very large silo fields that China has developed in recent years, which are being tracked by various people. That's one. Second aspect is that China's nuclear doctrine and postures have undergone fairly significant changes in recent years. One, number of nuclear weapons which are kept on high alert. That means, you have mating of nuclear weapons with the delivery systems has gone up. And this is also indicated by strategic literature in China. A second aspect is, Chinese strategic literature suggests that they are moving towards what is called early warning counterstrike, which in Western parlance is known as launch and warning. That once you get information that there's incoming missile, you don't wait to be hit, you retaliate. This will be a very major shift. And China is developing requisite early warning system with help of Russia. This is one area where people are keeping track of. So you have both enhancement of China's nuclear weapon arsenal and changes in its nuclear doctrines and posture. in some case, deviation from its no first use policy, because early warning counterstrike will be a departure from no first use. Because it also talks about using nuclear weapons if its conventional facilities are hit. So this is one. Now, until recently, we had maintained that there is basic parity between nuclear capabilities of India and China. We never went into nuclear arms race either with China or Pakistan. But as Masuri brought out, I think there is need to revisit that. We have a very conservative posture going by information available in public domain about the size of our nuclear arsenal. Will that be sufficient if China's nuclear inventory grows beyond a point? And many of the nuclear weapons China has are targeting India. This is again something which is well known. So we may have to revisit our own, not so much doctrine, but the size of our nuclear arsenal, as Masuri mentioned.
Thank you, ambassadors. There's just one last question I would like Ambassador Kanta to answer because we are running out of time. So just take one more question. What is conflict over Taiwan coming? What role can India play in preventing a conflict over Taiwan? Or in case conflict does happen? Secondly, is there a possibility that India could arrive at an understanding with China and rather move away from America? What could China do to make it attractive to India to think of this? It seems to me that there is some interest in such a possibility in the Indian security establishment. I would just like to quickly, if you could just share a few points on this. And
I wish
would
I
love
could
to
give you a
finish
short
it.
answer to the questions. The second question first, whether we can do a deal with China. I don't see much possibility because, the way China looks at India, respective worldviews, China has in mind a sort of hierarchy where it would like to emerge as the preeminent country in the region, India becoming a sort of uh, subsidiary power, which will not be acceptable to us. The way China has not respected our interests, our aspirations, our concerns in our neighborhood or on issues like membership of the UN Security Council, nuclear suppliers group, a lot of things. So I don't see a possibility of a big deal with China or a real reset in relations with China. That's not likely to happen. On Taiwan, what I'll suggest that first we should understand that any Taiwan Strait crisis will not be something happening in a distant theater. It will have a very direct fallout for us. For one reason, a good part of our trade passes through, South China Sea, adjacent to Taiwan Strait or through Taiwan Strait. Then, any major crisis in Taiwan Strait will seriously affect the global value chain. Impact could be in trillions of dollars. So it will be like a heart attack to global economy. So it will impact us as well. Equally important, if Taiwan were to be seized forcibly by China, it will completely change, the strategic balance in Western Pacific. And I suspect, India will come under much greater pressure along India-China borders after that. So these are aspects we'll have to bear in mind. We should closely monitor what's happening. As I mentioned earlier, I don't see much possibility of an all-out conflict in Taiwan Strait. China has sort of fine-tuned the policy of incremental pressure, salami slicing, creating new normal, and using that as base for further escalation. It did that after Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit. Most recently, kind of military maneuvers it had after President Lai Ching-te took over on 20th May. I think that will continue. So gray zone operations will continue. What we can do to prevent, frankly, very limited. We can we have already taken the position, like after Speaker Pelosi's visit, we publicly stated that any unilateral change in the status quo will not be desirable, will not be acceptable to us. And this was a message to China. I think we can sort of reiterate that position more frequently. We need to develop our own relations with Taiwan without necessarily, moving away from where we are not going to recognize Taiwan as a sovereign entity, but closer engagement is required for a variety of reasons. Uh, I don't see much likelihood of India getting directly involved in a Taiwan Strait conflict. But there may be, involvement elsewhere. India-China borders may become live, or we have foundational agreements with USA under which USA may ask for some support in terms of logistics or repair of vessels. I don't know. That will really depend on exact circumstances at that time. But this is one issue we need to very closely monitor, because, as I mentioned earlier, Taiwan is not a distant theater. It impacts our national security interests very directly.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I would like to now, because we are already running short of time, so I would now like to thank you, all the panelists and all the participants for this. So let's move to the closing remarks session now. Ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the end of this insightful discussion, I would like to take a moment to reflect on the key points raised by esteemed panelists. We have explored the major drivers of geopolitics in 2024, including the technological advancements, economic shifts, geopolitical rivalries, security challenges, energy transition, and the global governance. Each of these factors will play a crucial role in shaping the international landscape in the years to come. I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our distinguished panelists. I would like to start with Professor Madhu Bhalla. Professor Bhalla, thank you sincerely for your enlightening uh, pointers covering spectrum of global conflicts, from the intricacies of the Israel-Palestine and Russia-Ukraine wars to the nuances of the US-China rivalry. Your insights into the transformative role of the AI and the imperative of energy and economic security were truly enlightening and added depth to our understanding. Ambassador Suri, I extend my heartfelt gratitude for your illuminating discourse on a range of topics, from the from the UK election to the complex dynamics of the Russian activities in Ukraine and challenges of radicalization. Your insights into the European recognition of Palestine, China's emerging role, and Europe's strategies of decoupling and de-risking vis-a-vis China were immensely valuable. Additionally, your reflections on the upcoming US elections, the evolving global supply chain dynamics, and the role of semiconductor chips and technology provided invaluable perspectives on the changing geopolitical landscape. Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Kanta, I want to express my sincere appreciation for your enlightening presentation on India's geopolitical challenges, the ongoing conflicts in the region, and the intricate nature of the proxy wars. Your insights shed light on critical issues of economic security and the implications of China's gray zone operations in the South China Sea and the broader Indo-Pacific arena. Your analysis of the upcoming US elections, the potential outcomes of a Biden re-election versus a Trump 2.0, and their implications for predictability and stability in global affairs, alongside your insights into the complexities of the global supply chain and the significance of technology, semiconductor chips, lithium-ion batteries, electric vehicles, provided invaluable perspectives on navigating the complexities of today's geopolitical landscape. Uh, your contributions have enriched our understanding of the complexities of contemporary geopolitics and provided us with much to contemplate as we move forward. I would like to thank all the attendees for joining us today. Your engagement and participation are what make events like this meaningful and impactful. I hope that you found the discussion stimulating and it has helped spark new ideas and perspectives on the evolving geopolitical landscape. Lastly, I would like to express my gratitude to the Ideas team and the Geopolitics and Strategies Constellation for organizing this event. Your commitment to fostering interdisciplinary research and dialogue is truly commendable. As we conclude, I encourage you all to continue exploring these important issues and to remain engaged with the initiatives and research being conducted by Ideas and the Geopolitics and Strategies Constellation. Together, as we can contribute to a deeper understanding of the forces shaping our world and work towards a more informed and collaborative global community. Thank you once again for being with us today. Have a great day ahead. I would like to thank you all the panelists for valuable insights, answering the questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Nikita.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Professor.